darkness of November 1939, one of the largest armies on Earth crossed into a country with fewer people than many of its own cities. More than 450,000 Soviet troops, supported by thousands of tanks, artillery pieces, and aircraft, rolled toward the Finnish border, expecting a quick victory. Soviet commanders believed the campaign would last no more than 2 weeks. Some officers even carried parade uniforms, convinced they would soon be marching triumphantly through the streets of Helsinki. But they had made one fatal mistake. They had underestimated Finland. The Soviet Union possessed overwhelming numbers, superior firepower, and one of the world's largest militaries. Finland, by comparison, had a population of just under 4 million people, limited industrial capacity, and only a handful of tanks and aircraft. On paper, the outcome seemed inevitable, yet within weeks, Soviet columns were trapped in snow-covered forests, tanks burned beside frozen roads, and thousands of soldiers disappeared into the white wilderness without ever seeing the enemy. The world watched in disbelief as one of history's greatest military powers struggled against a nation many had expected to collapse almost immediately. This was not simply a war between two countries. It became a battle between numbers and strategy, machines and determination, overwhelming force and extraordinary resilience. It would become known as the Winter War. To understand why the Soviet Union invaded Finland, we must first look at Europe in the late 1930s. Adolf Hitler had begun expanding Nazi Germany across the continent. In August 1939, Germany and the Soviet Union shocked the world by signing the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, a non-aggression agreement that secretly divided Eastern Europe into spheres of influence. Hidden within the treaty were confidential protocols assigning Finland, Estonia, Latvia, and parts of Poland to the Soviet sphere. Joseph Stalin believed another major European war was inevitable. His greatest concern was the security of Leningrad, now known as St. Petersburg, one of the Soviet Union's most important cities. The Finnish border lay only about 30 kilometers from Leningrad. From Stalin's perspective, that distance was dangerously short. He feared that if Germany ever attacked the Soviet Union, Finland could become a launching point for enemy forces threatening the city. Rather than risk that possibility, Stalin demanded territorial concessions from Finland. The Soviet government proposed what it described as a simple exchange. Finland would surrender territory on the Karelian Isthmus, move its border farther away from Leningrad, and lease the Hanko Peninsula for a Soviet naval base. In return, the Soviet Union offered Finland larger areas of land farther north. To Soviet officials, the proposal seemed reasonable. To the Finnish government, it was unacceptable. Finland had gained its independence from Russia only in 1917, after more than a century under imperial rule. Many Finns feared that accepting Soviet demands would only encourage further pressure until their independence disappeared completely. Negotiations continued for weeks. Neither side was willing to compromise. Eventually, diplomacy failed. On November 26, 1939, explosions struck the Soviet village of Mainila near the Finnish border. The Soviet government immediately accused Finland of firing artillery shells across the frontier and killing Soviet soldiers. Finland strongly denied responsibility. It even proposed a joint international investigation. The offer was rejected. 4 days later, on November 30th, Soviet forces invaded Finland along multiple fronts without a formal declaration of war. The League of Nations condemned the invasion, and the Soviet Union was eventually expelled from the organization. But international condemnation did little to stop the advancing Red Army. The Soviet military expected overwhelming success. Its commanders believed Finnish resistance would collapse after only a few days. The Red Army possessed nearly 1 million soldiers available for the campaign, thousands of tanks, modern artillery, and complete numerical superiority in aircraft. Finland faced this invasion with barely 300,000 mobilized troops, limited ammunition, and almost no armored forces. Many Finnish soldiers lacked proper winter uniforms. Some units possessed only a handful of anti-tank weapons. Against Soviet tanks, they often relied on little more than courage, careful planning, and homemade incendiary weapons that would later become famous as Molotov cocktails. The odds could hardly have been more unequal. Yet numbers alone do not win wars. Leadership, preparation, terrain, and morale often matter just as much. And in each of those categories, Finland possessed advantages the Soviet command had badly underestimated. Unlike Soviet soldiers, Finnish troops knew every forest, frozen lake, and narrow road crossing their homeland. The country was covered by dense forests stretching for hundreds of kilometers. During winter, temperatures regularly dropped below minus 40 degrees Celsius. Heavy snowfall buried roads beneath thick layers of ice. Large mechanized formations found movement extremely difficult. Long columns of Soviet vehicles were forced to travel along narrow roads surrounded by forests on both sides. That made them vulnerable. Finnish ski troops moved silently through the trees, dressed entirely in white camouflage. They blended almost perfectly into the snowy landscape. Using skis, they could travel far faster than Soviet infantry struggling through deep snow. Rather than confronting the Red Army directly, Finnish commanders adopted flexible hit-and-run tactics. Small units attacked isolated convoys, destroyed supply trucks, and disappeared into the forest before Soviet forces could respond. Each successful ambush slowed the invasion even further. One tactic became especially effective. Known as the Motti tactic, Finnish forces allowed long Soviet columns to advance deep into forest roads before cutting them into smaller, isolated sections. Once surrounded, these pockets could no longer receive food, fuel, ammunition, or reinforcements. Instead of fighting one enormous army, Finnish soldiers destroyed one isolated group after another. Cold soon became as deadly as enemy fire. Many Soviet troops had received inadequate winter clothing. Engines froze overnight. Weapons jammed. Food deliveries failed to arrive. Entire units became trapped for days in temperatures that could kill exposed soldiers within hours. The harsh Finnish winter had become an ally more powerful than any weapon. Meanwhile, across Europe, newspapers began reporting something almost unbelievable. A tiny democracy was resisting one of the largest military powers on earth. International volunteers offered to help Finland. Government sent medical supplies, weapons, and humanitarian aid, although no major power directly entered the war. Global sympathy overwhelmingly favored the Finnish people. Even military experts struggled to explain how such a small nation continued holding back the vastly larger Soviet army. But the greatest symbol of Finnish resistance had not yet appeared. Deep inside the snow-covered forests, a quiet farmer turned soldier was preparing to become the most feared sniper in military history. His name was Simo Häyhä. Before the Winter War ended, Soviet soldiers would give him a name that still echoes through history: the White Death.